on EILL. We are definitely not in Kansas anymore. Today, we're going to have a panel of speakers join us to talk about the experience with our ProQuest EILL pilot and kind of just any surprises and talk about their overall experience and kind of outcomes or findings that we've seen so far. So our speakers include Ilda Cardenas from Electronic Resources Librarian, Cal State Fullerton, Timothy Jackson, who's a Fulfillment and Resource Sharing Program Manager in the SUNY Library Services, and Mary Beth Gerard, Marketing and Sales Director, NYU Press. And myself, I'm really just going to kick us off. I'm Mindy Posnell, the Director of Product Management from ProQuest, and I will just walk us through kind of what we've seen so far at a high level throughout the pilot, and then we'll facilitate some questions after each one of our speakers has kind of walked through their slides and their experience with our pilot for electronic ILL of whole ebooks. So with that said, what we've seen throughout the pilot is we had in the beginning, we started back in late 2021 with 6 different content providers, and availability at the time was just over 260,000 ebooks for our different pilot pods or consortia, what you might have. And what we really saw is that throughout that time period, we've had over 2,100 whole ebook ILL requests throughout the different groups. And this has all been facilitated on eBook Central. So we've been able to host lots of different providers, and we're adding 3 providers this year in this last year of the pilot. So we'll have even more content to be able to share and lend amongst those different groups. On average, we really saw that the EILL requests were coming from upper level students. Not really surprising when a lot of them are really doing, when you think about ILL, doing known item searching, or they're looking for something very specific to support their thesis or their particular research use case. So we saw 78% of that coming from upper level students, being, master's and doctorate level students. And we saw each one of those accessing at least 32, around on average 32 pages per loan, which is great to see, you're not looking at the whole book in particular, but you're looking at particular sections or particular pieces that apply to your research. And as we go forward, as I mentioned, we're really looking at adding more publishers, and we are just finishing adding those for this year. So we'll get that finalized here. We currently went from 6 to 9. And also our usage just continues throughout the year. In the second year, we're keeping the same number of libraries, but just adding more publishers to really get a better understanding of more usage, and then again, what might the business model look like moving forward, and working through those particular details. But with that said, I'm going to hand it off to Tim to walk us through his experience and some of the outcomes that he's seen so far.
Great, thank you very much, Mindy. And hello, everyone. My name is Timothy Jackson. I'm the Resource Sharing and Fulfillment Program Manager for SUNY Library Services. So I am providing ALMA-related support for circulation, resource sharing, and reserves to all 60 SUNY campuses. So I've been very heavily involved in SUNY's implementation of the ebook ILL program. We initially were hoping to implement this in either ILLiad or ALMA. Unfortunately, that didn't prove to be possible for us. So what we wound up doing instead is, well, first of all, we created a collection of requestable titles in SUNY's network zone. And then within that collection, we put an open URL link to a LibWizard request form. And then we activated that collection for all of the SUNY campuses who are participating in this pilot project. It's roughly half of the system is participating. So when a user finds a requestable ebook and clicks on the request and access link, they're taken to this LibWizard form. It's pre-populated for them. All they need to do is provide their contact information and hit submit. And once they do that, that creates a ticket in our LibAnswers ticketing system. Once we see a ticket, we actually have a Google document that we use to figure out which SUNY campus owns the requested title. That document also contains login links and usernames and passwords for the backend of eBook Central for all of the participants. So once we know where the requested ebook is held, we log into that library's eBook Central, find the requested item, generate the link, the ebook ILL access link, and then use the LibAnswers ticket to send that URL to the user. And things that we've observed so far, well, first of all, unfortunately, we had to eliminate all single-use titles from the collection of requestable ebooks. Unfortunately, there were just too many concerns about ebook ILL potentially temporarily blocking access at the owning library. Something else that we've noticed is we have been very, very surprised by the number of requests we've received. Our collection of requestable titles is only about it's about 3,750 items right now. That's out of more than 5 million books in our overall inventory. And there's no way for us to highlight these requestable ebooks in Primo search results. So we're just relying on users finding these records. And we figured, less than 4,000 out of more than 5 million, we didn't think users would be finding these records all that much. And we really didn't think we'd get many requests at all, but we've been very, very wrong about that. In fact, we've received about 1,800 requests to date. And something else we've noticed that some users, because the loan period is only 2 weeks, every 2 weeks, these people will log into Primo and request the same title over and over and over again. So that's been an interesting thing to see. We're also noting some examples where users are submitting requests for an entire ebook, but we do include a notes field on the form. And we do occasionally see notes that they really only need a specific chapter. We've also run into some issues with non-linear titles. Like I said, we did eliminate single-use titles entirely, but we did allow free-use and non-linear titles to be requestable. But there have been a couple of instances this semester where one SUNY campus, we have a bunch of students asking for the same title, and it's a non-linear title, and we had to remove the titles from the collection of requestable ebooks because within the first month of the semester, we already used up like half of the allotted access, and we didn't want to completely use it up. So we just had to render that book no longer requestable. Then we would reach out to the library where all these requests have been coming from and let them know that they might need to purchase the title for themselves. Last thing that we've noticed is that the usage rate has been less than 60%. So only 3 out of 5 of these loans are actually getting used. And we think that's because we're having to use LibAnswers to handle the requests. So when a user submits a request, any other type of interlibrary loan request, any email notifications they get about that request come from their home library. But for ebook ILL, those emails come from SUNY Library Services, which isn't necessarily an address they'll recognize. It could be getting caught in spam filters. We really don't know. So as far as the future goes, one thing we would really like to see is the implementation of some sort of renewal function, because the fact that we're getting the same people asking for the same titles over and over again suggests that there's a need for that. Also, it would be really, really helpful if we had the option to block ebook ILL lending for specific titles. That might help us get some of the single-use titles into the collection of requestable ebooks. Um, and also, what we'd really, really like to see is some integration with Alma so that the request can be handled within Alma and users end up receiving the download link in an email that comes from their home institution. We think that could really, really help address the low rate of usage. So that's everything I wanted to talk about. Thank you all very much, and I will now hand things over to Hilda.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ilya Diaz. I'm the Electronic Resources Librarian at Cal State Fullerton. And my role in the ILL pilot was setting up the ebooks for the pilot to make sure that the records are or to facilitate access for this. So I'll be talking mostly about the setup. When I came onto the pilot, there was no documentation over how to set up for the pilot, and the instructions that I received were not that robust. They kind of suggested that I take the approach that Timothy took by creating a collection in Alma and making the records available that way. But that didn't work. I submitted a few tickets with Ex Libris, and there was some suggestion that I create a separate library to make sure that only our students are able to see the link for this to request these ebooks. And unfortunately, that really didn't work. And a few months later down the line, it really messed things up for us. Like, it was a big access disaster that I had to clean up. But eventually, what we figured out was, like, we'd have to create a local collection where we maintain the titles that way, and we have to create the open URL for ILLiad so these requests could work. And when I talked to the representative from Ex Libris, they kind of showed us that we can create this open URL with Excel, and my colleague, our programmer guy at my library, said, we'll do this with Python. So now we've created a Python script to create the open URL for ILLiad. And so now when users see an ebook from this pilot, they'll click on the link, and then they redirect to ILLiad, where they can request a title that way. And so since we've been in the pilot, like, now maintenance is pretty routine. We all know what we're doing. I think that it takes about 2 people to process the records right now. And it takes however many people in ILL to fill the requests. And usage is going up. And some of the observations that I've seen based on the usage statistics I receive monthly is in contrast to Timothy's discussion, we still keep the single user ebooks available. and they make about 34% of the titles used in this pilot. The 3 users, there's like 7% of those titles are getting used, and they don't really cause that many turnaways. And after like working with Timothy on this presentation, I was a bit concerned about our non-linear titles and how that would affect access for us here at Cal State Fullerton. And they make 40% of the collection. And after consulting with my collection development librarian, I told her the situation that our non-linear uses could be going to our partner library, San Diego State. But we kind of looked at the titles, and she said it's fine. It's fine to use these, to keep these titles in the collection, just because they're triggered to change over to an unlimited access model. Like once all of our non-linear uses are used up, we'll upgrade to an unlimited user access model for these titles. So she wasn't worried, and if she's not worried, I'm not worried. And a little bit about the future. So I'm the electronic resources librarian. I read counter usage all day long, and that's what I'm most familiar with. So getting the stats from like monthly in a different format where you kind of have to like interpret what that information means, I think it would be more helpful to have a standardized use, because it's hard to tell if a use is a use when it's not a counter compliant report, when it doesn't come counter compliant. And so recently there's been discussion in my library that ILLiad might get sunsetted. We have our own server for it, and cybersecurity is an issue. So, and now that we've also made the transition to Rapido, things might change for us in the future, and we might be looking to implement ebook ILL with Rapido, but I'm still not too sure. And that's my talk for today, and thank you all for listening.
Great. So I'm going to take over from here. I'm Mary Beth Jarrett. I'm the Sales and Marketing Director at NYU Press. And I was most interested to see who was borrowing our titles and which titles were being borrowed. So like Mindy was saying, I wasn't really surprised by the breakdown of the types of universities that were borrowing our titles. Most of our titles are geared for upper level undergraduate or graduate level students, courses, scholars. And so this breakdown makes total sense. We always hope that our books will be read by the general public, but the public library loans, that tracks with about the rest of our sales. To look at the types of pages that were printed, that was really interesting that so many pages were printed, but really from only 2 titles. There were a handful of pages that were printed across the list, but most of the printings were concentrated in 2 titles, which is interesting because those 2 titles are the most design heavy of all the titles that are available for a loan. So, and also our books aren't wildly expensive for real people. So I was surprised that people would print so many pages from these pretty books with color inserts and not just spring for the $30 for their list price. But that's, who knows about people's buying habits, right? What's also interesting is about the pages that were printed is that these were not our top loaned titles. So if you look at the next slide, I was more interested to see where our loans were by title type, or actually by title. So Joanna, if you could give me the next slide, I can show you all sorts of cool facts. I was looking at the loan statistics as discovery. So we had a bunch of loans, 176 loans across 77 titles. And the most popular title, which was not one of the most printed titles, had 13 different loans. And a lot of them were from the same school. So maybe to Timothy's point, it was the same person loaning the same title over and over again. I was also interested to see the breakdown across the pub years. One of the things that we tell ourselves about working at NYU Press is that we publish cutting edge scholarship, which often means that we're publishing for a market that doesn't yet exist. So we're always hoping that scholars and the market will catch up to our publishing. And this is a very reassuring split to see that there are so many deeper backlist titles that were borrowed or loaned. And also what I found interesting and reassuring about the split of titles was that it wasn't our best-selling titles that were loaned. They were titles that we weren't totally sure worked. The sales in print and actually the library acquisitions straight up are low. But it's interesting that they have a longer leg in the loan universe. So I mean, I take most things as a reassuring fact, but I found this a very reassuring piece of statistics. So my questions, though, are, does this change the way that libraries will acquire NYU Press titles? I think that we think of ourselves as like a next tier acquisition. Libraries always acquire Oxford titles or Princeton titles first, but does this kind of loan information escalate NYU in the minds of acquisition libraries? Do you start to think differently about the types of titles that we publish in terms of your acquisition strategy? And now that Timothy said that thing about maybe the loan request is getting caught in people's spam filters, that was really interesting too. Like you would go through the effort of filling out the paperwork to make a loan and then you'd never pick it up, but that makes a lot more sense. And I think I told Mindy at the very beginning of our participation in EILL is that some of the older titles that were surfaced, it made me realize that they have a new life. And so I repackaged them, I made them classics, and I've re-released them to the wild. So I'm hoping that not only do they find new readers in libraries, but they find new readers, in classrooms or on the street. And so I really like everything about ILL in terms of what it does for my knowledge of my catalog.
Great, thank you, Mary Beth. And I think at this point I'm going to ask one question and then I'll sort of circulate it in the same order that we went through our presentation also. And I think a couple great points that seem to be consistent across all three presentations. And I think the one most important that as we kind of finalize this pilot moving into 2024 and sort of harden everything for a full production product, one of the top things on our list is really integrations. So integrations starting with Alma, resource sharing, and Rapido are already on our roadmap and looking at those integrations. We will also be looking at potentially some other integrations with resource sharing systems based upon the interest from libraries. So I think that'll be great to kind of address some of those, whether it's in spam, but they'll be getting it from a system that they would expect it to be. Again, it's some lumps and bumps as being part of a pilot, right? So that's really exciting moving forward to just see even more usage. But I think the question really is, so just discussing anything from your learnings, but why is ebook ILLs an important service for your offering, whether that be your library offering or for you, Mary Beth, for your publisher offering? And Tim, I'll start with you and why you think it's important for the SUNY Consortium.
Well, this probably won't come as a big shock to anyone, but you know, the budget situation, across the SUNY system, isn't great. We have a lot of campuses where their collection budgets have been static or been decreasing. So our ability to share materials with other campuses has become increasingly important because we just don't have the funds available to meet our own users' needs the way we used to. And we've been able to share print books, relatively easily for years. The same with articles from electronic journals, but this is actually the first pilot project that I've been aware of that's really, really, really made successful inroads into ebook ILL. It's a question I get asked all the time, like, what are we going to do about ebook ILL? Because we really need to be able to share these titles with each other because of the constraints being placed upon us, our collection budgets. So I've been really, really happy about how things have gone so far, because, like I said, we really need to be able to share these materials, and we've actually been able to successfully do that so far.
Perfect, great. And I'll turn the same question to you, Ilda, and maybe from your perspective, why EILL, or we call it EILL, but whole ebook ILL is important to the Cal State group and to Cal State Fullerton.
Well, so coming from Cal State Fullerton, we are an e-preferred campus. So our preferred acquisition method is to purchase ebooks. And so we have this big collection, and our collection isn't valuable unless it's getting used. And if that means we have to share our titles with other campuses, that's great. And then more like from personal experience, whenever I'm working on reference, I get a lot of chats from students saying, "Oh, I see this book, I want access to it," but we only realize that it's an ebook, and it's like, well, like I can't really like say, oh, just like buy the ebook or like do something like that. It's like I'd like to be able to give them an answer of like, yes, you can get access to this book. Like, it doesn't matter whether or not it's print or electronic. You have this information need, and we can fill it. It would be nice to be able to say yes to our students.
That's great. I always hear, always being able to say yes and direct them to a definitive and hopefully quick, not having to wait weeks is always a great solution. And then, Mary Beth, I'll just ask you too, from a publisher perspective, I know why it's important to support this from your perspective also.
I mean, look, I'm in a great position. I'm sales and marketing. So I always prefer that libraries buy our content outright. That's the best. But if you're not going to buy it, I want you to use our content. So it's just great to know that our books have an extended reach and can find a larger audience than maybe everybody who has budget to pay for it. So that's my Pollyanna answer.
Perfect. Well, I want to make sure that we leave time for our virtual audience to also ask us questions. So we should have about 10 minutes when this is viewed for you to type in and for us to answer questions. And I want to thank our panelists really for just bringing an honest view of it's a pilot. So has everything been, perfect? No, but it's very informative when moving into product development and what are sort of the areas that we need to address. And I think that EILL has been on everybody's minds for a while. So moving forward to actually having a service offering and getting closer to that is always very exciting. So I want to thank Tim, Ilda, and Mary Beth very much for taking the time to, really give the perspectives and sort of learnings that we've seen throughout the pilot from very different perspectives and some different experiences too. So I think it's great for the audience to hear all of those. So at this point, we will just open it up for questions if anybody has any questions.